Just 1 minute. Okay, go ahead.
It is 6:01, and I will call this meeting of the Lunenburg Town Council to order. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Prior to getting to the agenda approval, there was a late-breaking staff request that I'm not sure all of you saw about the potential deferral of item 9A, so I'll allow the CAO to speak to that before we approve the agenda.
Thank you, Your Worship. We just learned of the possibility today in conversation with provincial procurement representatives. So the province of Nova Scotia has a public procurement office that there might be some opportunities for bulk purchasing in regards to the purchase of fuel, that being gas and diesel for furnaces. So we would like the opportunity to explore that before we report back to council. So we would ask that you defer consideration of the staff report that is on this evening's agenda, because it may materially affect our purchase of fuel, which is about $134,000 a year. So we figured that would be worthwhile exploring, and then we would get back to you hopefully for next meeting on the 27th, Your Worship.
Is that amenable to council? Deputy Mayor?
Well, my only question would be, does that mean we're going to have to retender that fuel purchase contract?
There we go. Your Worship, at this point in time, I don't rightly know. We'll have to figure that out, whether or not it will materially affect the bids and if we would have to go back. These were requests for quotes that were done, so we do have the opportunity. We have a little more leverage and flexibility in asking other suppliers for pricing. But as I say, this is potentially considerable savings that we might have that might be available. So we want to explore that. And yes, we would comment on that in a staff report for you if it's going to change things significantly from a procurement perspective.
Councillor Halverson?
I guess to follow the deputy mayors, would that give the opportunity for those people who have already submitted proposals basically to sharpen their pencils as well to resubmit, or would their current offer stand?
I would think in all likelihood their current offer would stand, Your Worship, but again, that's something we'll just have to explore. It's not a situation we've been in before, so I'm a bit hesitant to project too far into the future about how we'll go, but we'll canvass all of those issues to see.
Okay. And for clarification on my part, if that were to drop the total amount of the procurement below $100,000, it wouldn't even need to come back to council, correct?
That's right, Your Worship. Yeah, that's another option.
Okay. Is that amenable to everyone? Is there any objection to deferring that if necessary to April 27th? Seeing none, we will consider that approved by unanimous consent. And then I would look to a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any discussion or debate, additions, deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. It takes us on to the approval of our March 23rd council meeting minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve those. Moved by Councillor Birtles, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any errors or omissions to note? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. There are two pieces of correspondence to note for council. One is a letter from the Department of Municipal Affairs advising about a funding application that was unsuccessful, and the other is advising of a $1,000 grant to assist with the 911 system. Any questions for staff on either of those pieces of correspondence? Councillor Halverson.
I guess through your worship, I would just ask, where does that leave us in regards to that shared municipal agreement, and how are we going to fund that?
I'm sorry, Your Worship. I had an interruption. Could the question be repeated? I beg your pardon.
Yes, thanks. I'd just like to know, where does that leave us now that with that shared municipal agreement as far as funding work we need to get done?
Well, unfortunately, then I'm sorry, Your Worship, about that. Unfortunately, it would have to be shared by each party at 100%. So we'll continue to explore other options, though, where they might exist. But for now, unfortunately, that one just didn't work out. They were oversubscribed.
Councillor Hobbs?
Thank you. And I'd just like to clarify, is the proposed 100% funding related in the budget, represented in the budget at this point?
Yes, the budget, the draft budget was drafted, assuming that we would cover that 100%.
Okay. Any further questions at this point? Seeing none, that takes us on to unfinished business. Item 7A, the wastewater treatment plant metering capital budget pre-approval request. There is a staff report and draft motion, and I will allow staff to speak to that report.
Thank you. So the project of the wastewater treatment plant flow metering project. Now you've all seen a copy of the report that was put together, and basically what we're here to talk about. No, thanks. To talk about today is to identify an increase in costs that came out with the detailed engineering for the project, and the fact that we would like to be able to carry over this project into the upcoming fiscal year. So just to give you a bit of background about the project, is that we need to have a flow metering device at the wastewater treatment plant to be able to monitor and measure the effluent coming out of the plant. In the past, we've had a internal measuring device that was accepted in the past, but it wasn't. It isn't an ideal. It isn't very accurate. So with the new regulations that exist, we're under the gun to be able to provide a proper metering metering device in order to measure the flow out of the plant. So the project that was identified last year had a budget of $50,000, and with the result of the final detailed design engineering, we would have to increase that cost. There was some delays in executing the detailed design, because it took us some time in order to figure out exactly where to install the device. So that there was a bunch of options that went back and forth. And because of the metering device needs so much upstream and downstream straight lines of pipe, it kind of limited us to where we can install it. So we did select a place, and it's outside of the plant walls, and it's in an underground portion of the line. So we would have to be able to install the meter, have access to the meter. And the part of the project that increased the cost was that we identified that we should have isolation valves in order to be able to isolate on either side in order to undergo maintenance of this meter, and that was a resulting in the increased cost. But now the engineering design work is complete, and we're at the point in time that we can proceed to tender. So a proposed revised schedule is to tender the construction contract this month of April, award the contract by mid-May. The material delivery is about 10 weeks, and have installation of the meter in August of 2021. So as I said, that there's a financial impact to the project. The revised capital budget estimate, as I say, has been increased from 50,000 to 66,000, so an increase of $16,000. So in summary, we're recommending, first of all, that the project be carried forward into the upcoming fiscal year of 21-22, and that the budget be increased from 50,000 to 66,000. And for the council to be able to pre-approve this project by adopting the proposed motion.
Thank you, Dennis. Are there any questions for Dennis on this? Councillor Sanford?
I'm just wondering if the location of the metering would be impacted by any flooding.
No, I don't believe so. It'll actually be underground, and we'll have access to the meter from above as well as the isolation valves. So no, that would not be in effect.
Any further questions? Is it anyone's pleasure to move the draft motion as presented? The Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Is there any discussion or debate on the draft motion as presented? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Next, we have a flood control engineering staff information report. So we will keep Dennis on the hopper and give him another 5 minutes for this one.
Sure. This report for the town council is a report summarizing a flood study that was undertaken by the town, and it was as a result of the effects of the flooding that had occurred at the wastewater treatment plant during Hurricane Dorian into 2019. So I think everybody remembers the effects of that event. So the study was initiated to work out through three different items: the causes of the flooding, what effect that the future sea level rise has on the future flooding scenarios, and what kind of mitigative measures are possible to prevent the kind of flooding that had occurred in 2019, to prevent that in the future. So to summarize the recommendations from the report is there's three of them. The first one is an installation of an actively managed tide gate on the outer culvert, the back harbor, which is across Highway 332. The second recommendation is an installation of a backup generator for the wastewater treatment plant in order to keep the power going when the power is lost, and to keep that equipment in operation. And the third was a provision for an inflatable temporary plug that can be used in a short-term solution and as a temporary backup to the long-term gates solution. So those three items came out in the report that was completed. And what has resulted because of that is that the installation of an actively managed tide gate is included in the pre-design engineering work that we already have underway. So that'll be part of that discussion and early design. As well, item number 2, the installation of the backup generator is also included in that scope of work. So for those things, we will have more detail and more meat to those pieces of work when the pre-design is completed at the end of June. And the third item about the temporary plug, we've already purchased the temporary plug, and And an operating procedure for its deployment has been developed, and the plug was in fact deployed once during a potential hurricane last fall as a precautionary measure. So continuing on regarding the financial impact, as we mentioned, the first two items are included in the pre-design work that's already undergoing, and it's part of that budget. And the temporary plug was purchased within the operating budget in 2020. So, just as this memo and the report is for the Mayor and Council's information as of today, just to give you an update.
Thank you, Dennis. Are there any questions related to this information report? Dennis, at this stage, Councillor Sanford.
Just a question through the chair regarding the plug. I know plugs are temporary, a part of a temporary solution, but what is the lifespan of a plug?
I'm not really sure. I personally haven't seen the plug, and I haven't personally seen the design of it. I would imagine that the length would determine about how often that is deployed. But if I'll take an opportunity to have a look at its design, and I can get back to you on that.
Any further questions? Councillor Ernst?
Just wondering if I may have missed this and looking for confirmation. The tide gate, there were a couple options that were presented. Have staff come up with one that they want to use, or is that still being discussed?
For the permanent tide gate?
Yes.
We haven't come to any conclusion on that. That'll still be part of the evaluation. We haven't gotten far down that road yet.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions at this stage? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Dennis, for that information report. That takes us on to committee meetings and recommendations. And there are two recommendations from our April the 6th Committee of the Whole meeting. One is that Councillor Halverson gives notice of proposed amendments to the Committees of Council policy to wind up the Recreation and Active Transportation Committees. And I'm assuming, Councillor Halverson, that we can consider said notice so given. Okay. So that will come forward to us at our April 27th meeting for council decision in the form of a motion. And the second is to make a submission to the federal government in support of infrastructure funding priorities as discussed on April the 6th. And that was a recommendation from Committee of the Whole, and I'm just wondering if somebody would care to move that and so direct staff. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Halverson. Is there any further discussion on that item? Councillor Sanford.
Just for clarity and understanding, is there perhaps a limit to the budget that we can apply for? Like, are we able to go full on with this and not necessarily like make the wastewater treatment plant funding piece a priority, but also make the other two aspects a priority as well, one being the housing aspect, and just at the minute the third one escapes me, but I know there's three. So as opposed to it being this is the priority, we go in full guns with all three as a priority. It's like go big or stay home. Do we have a choice of that, or like?
I could weigh in, but I'll allow the CAO to comment first about what the nature of this is and why we're doing it.
Right. And you could probably do that far more eloquently than I can at a policy level, Your Worship. My understanding is that this is more of a discussion paper seeking submissions across the country. And we were but one recipient from our MP's office forwarded it to us for commentary to give the federal government some indication of what the priorities are, at least within our own municipality. It's entirely at our discretion what submissions to put forward. Traditionally, the infrastructure monies have been oriented to hard infrastructure, so the streets, maybe environmental projects such as stormwater separation from sanitary, as we've done in the past, water main upgrades, those sort of things. It might be bold to think that the federal government will even consider other options, but I think the committee felt it was very worthwhile to put forward additional considerations such as the alternative energy and housing. You can choose to prioritize them though in any way you wish, give any other kind of indications to the federal government. This is our opportunity for input and to give the government feedback before I presume they solidify their positions on infrastructure funding.
Okay. Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, it has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. That takes us on to new business, and as we discussed at the outset, item 9A has been deferred for staff to seek potential bulk savings, and that takes us on to item 9B, 101 Masons Beach Road, an application to amend a development agreement, and I will look to the planner. There is a draft motion, but to provide some insight as to that.
Take the mask off. Thank you, Your Worship. This is an application by Tim Reibling, who is in Zoom land today watching. It's a development agreement entered into on April 5th, 2011 for resort hotel, condominium units, apartment building on 101 Masons Beach Road. The current development agreement under clause 9 states that any development which commences more than 10 years from the date of this agreement requires an amending agreement. So the applicant is asking for an amending agreement. The accompanying letter dated March 22nd sets out the reasons why it wasn't started. So basically, to take this application in and to send it to Planning Advisory Committee so that they could hold a public information meeting.
Thank you, Dawn. Any questions around this at this stage? Seeing none, is it anyone's pleasure to move the draft motion as presented? Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Is there any discussion or debate with respect to the draft motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. And with that, we will take, with Council's indulgence, a 10-minute recess prior to reconvening in camera to discuss the items listed. So we will reconvene at 6:35.